First of all, my warm welcome to everyone, especially my co-instructors who need no introduction actually. Colonel Mrs. Bhadoria, who will be joining a little later because she's in another session, Dr. Sunita Dobe, Dr. Professor Kirti Singh, and Dr. Medha Prabhu Desai. And we are going to talk about glaucoma management in atypical cases, which we come across so frequently. And I'm going to begin the session, but before saying that, I have got to say a huge big thank you to all the co-instructors which have willingly joined into this session, as co-instructors for this instruction course, and willingly shared all the knowledge and experience that they have with everyone. And thank you all so much at the very outset only. And thank you for being with us, and thank you for all your cooperation. The first topic that in today's lecture in this instruction course is management of glaucoma with high myopia. Now, it is a huge problem. Myopia, we know, is a growing public health problem projected to affect approximately 5 million by the year 2050. Younger age people are mainly affected, mainly found in Asia, but now the West is also following us. Glaucoma is a leading cause of irreversible blindness and visual impairment worldwide, affecting 100 million people, and more will follow. So this is a catch-22 situation. What is it? Because myopia has a greater risk of glaucoma. Glaucomatous changes in these eyes are difficult to take.
We cannot see your slides, Dr. Sagarika.
You can't see me?
Yeah, no, I can see not your presentation.
Your slides are not visible. Just share screen.
Wait a minute. That's why I was wondering. I only hope. Wait a minute. Just a minute. I'll just go back again. Sorry for that. Share screen. I'm sorry. I think I've. Is it now okay? Can you all see now? Is the screen being shared now?
We can see you, not screen.
No, we cannot see your screen.
What is happening?
Just can I suggest a small change, ma'am?
Yeah.
Dr. Sunita did her testing as she joined in earlier. Can I suggest if she could go first? And then...
just let her go. Let her go ahead, please. Let her go.
Can I kindly request Dr. Sunita Dubey, ma'am, to please start her screen sharing and start her talk. Thank you.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see. Yeah, you can start now.
Okay, sure. Thank you, Dr. Patial, for having me in this course. So I'll be talking on corneal surgery and glaucoma. As we know, glaucoma is a leading cause of irreversible visual loss post-keratoplasty. Corneal transplant procedures like DSAC and DMAC, where posterior layers of cornea are replaced, are associated with a definitive risk of post-transplant glaucoma. However, anterior lamellar procedures have much lesser risk of developing long-term glaucoma. I'll start with a case. She was a 23-year-old female, recently visited us also, but before also, and she had a history of fall and blunt trauma when she presented for 1 year. And she was operated for trabeculectomy in March 2019 somewhere else, and one topical HGMs. So on presentation, her right eye was absolutely normal, and in the left eye there was corneal edema and corneal decompensation. There was localized bleb and total cataract and IOP of 18 millimeter mercury. So we planned, our cornea surgeon planned for cataract surgery and PK for her. Since it was a complicated cataract post-trauma, SICS with vitrectomy was done, and a week later, optical PK was also done. So post-operative, 1 week after PK, her pressure became very high and she was put on maximal medical therapy, including systemic ones. And 4 months later, her IOP became normal on maximal tolerable topical drops only. The systemic therapy was withdrawn and the pressure was 624. And then she did well for a few months, but after 8 months post-op, her pressure again became very high. The bleb was localized and the corneal edema and very advanced cupping on maximal tolerable AGM. So bleb needling was done. And post-reading, she did extremely well with IOP of 11. And with contact lens, her vision was 6/9 on no AGMs, and the topical steroids were tapered to 3 times a day. So her bleb was well formed, as you can see in the picture, post-needling. So etiology of glaucoma following keratoplasty is multifactorial. There can be pre-op, intra-op, and post-op factors, existing glaucoma, and complicated diagnosis like FAKI syndrome, trauma, or repeated PK. And it can be intraoperatively associated with distortion of angle, with collapse of TM, with loss of both anterior and posterior support, especially in patients who are left aphakic. And incidence is pretty high. So in post-PK cases, immediate post-operative causes are residual viscoelastic inflammation and improper suturing and small graft size. And in the late stages, there can be extensive PAS formation, pre-existing glaucoma, and steroid responsiveness. There is a lot of challenges in managing these patients also, because the IOP cannot be measured accurately because of astigmatism and corneal edema and scarring, and the assessment of optic nerve head and visual field is also difficult, and so the gonioscopy. Now coming to the second procedure, DMAC, which involves replacement of only endothelium and Descemet's membrane. So the advantage is definitely that it avoids creating stroma to stroma interface, and the visual prognosis is also better, and the incidence of glaucoma in post-DMAC patient is not as high as in PK. And the major cause in early stages of post-operative phase is the air bubble induced angle closure. You can call it pupillary block glaucoma because of the pressure of the iris against the lens, as you can see here. So iridectomy can be performed to relieve the pupillary block. However, as you can see in the picture, if the air completely fills up the anterior chamber, then it even blocks the iridectomy. So a full chamber air bubble can cause rise in intraocular pressure. Glaucoma in DSEC, again, the mechanisms are same. Air bubble can cause pupillary block, and air bubble can enter the posterior chamber, causing chronic synovial angle closure. So it's very important to manage it properly intraoperatively and post-operatively. Prevention is always better, and the graft size should be larger. This type of suturing is not good. It's a wrong way. So you need to take short and equal sutures between the host and graft like this. Fill the AC incompletely with 80% or less volume, and inferior peripheral iridectomy, especially if you've done DMAC and DSAC. Medical management is the first line of therapy. Avoid CAIs and PEG analog and pilocarpine in the initial stages because of the inflammation and corneal decompensation, and PI as and when required. Surgical management may be required in quite a few patients, especially if you have done therapeutic keratoplasty. However, there are chances of graft failure with any of these procedures which are can be performed. Trabeculectomy has better long-term graft survival as compared to AGV, but better IOP control can be achieved with AGV. And post-DSAC and post-DMAC, the prognosis for trabeculectomy is better because AC stability is maintained throughout. And as we know that in these eyes, ciliary sulcus fixation or pars plana placement of the tube is much better than anterior chamber tube placement, because so as to avoid the endothelial decompensation. DALK, advantage of DALK is that it involves removing only stroma while leaving the endothelium and Descemet's membrane behind. So the AC is maintained, and the incidence of glaucoma is pretty less with this condition as well. And the faster visual rehabilitation can be achieved. Boston K-Pro, I think this is again is a very serious situation, because the patients who undergo Boston K-Pro have multiple comorbidities, and glaucoma is pre-existing in as high as 40 to 76% of patients, and high incidence and severity of glaucoma prompts a low threshold for performing glaucoma surgery in these patients. And pathogenesis is multifactorial. It is because of the progressive shallowing of angle, inflammatory debris obstructing TM, crowding of anterior segment with the large capro backplate, and chronic use of steroids. So just a small video clip of this particular patient who had acid burn and who underwent multiple PKs and optical PKs, ultimately managed with AGV and Boston Capro. So this is how it is assembled, and the cornea surgeon performed the Capro. So this is the trepanization of recipient cornea. Removal of corneal button, and then implantation of Capro. So this patient was left aphakic, and aphakic type of Capro was used here, and this AGV plate was implanted, and then vitrectomy was performed using 3 sclerostomies by a vitreoretinal surgeon, complete vitrectomy, and you can see the disc. The patient didn't have that much of damage of the disc that time, but the pressure was very high. And the advantage of doing vitrectomy is that it removes the inflammatory substance. And then the tube was put through one of the ports, irrigation port, so you don't have to make a separate port. And the tube should be seen in the center, and then conjunctival closure and placement of this PCA. So this is post-operatively. The patient could maintain good vision, and you can see the tube as well. So to conclude, depending on the underlying corneal disorder and surgery performed, glaucoma can be both aggressive and refractory to medical and surgical treatment. So adequate management of glaucoma is essential to stop glaucoma progression and maintain visual prognosis. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sunita. And I think I can join in now, if it is okay by the other co-instructors.
Yes, sure.
Thank you so much.
Share button, do button, right. The PowerPoint is not open.
Just give me a few seconds.
Ma'am, first of all, open your PowerPoint. Hello.
Can you see now? Are my slides visible?
No, ma'am.
Not yet.
Okay.
Dr. Sagarika, they're still
Yeah.
not visible.
Yeah.
Now it has started.
Now we
Okay.
can see.
Okay.
Yes.
Can I proceed now? Thank you
Yes,
so
sure,
much
sure.
for all your cooperation. So we're going to talk about managing glaucoma in these atypical high myopia cases, which we are constantly finding. And we know that myopia and glaucoma coexist, and myopia is also growing public health problem. Younger age being affected, Asia, and then followed by the West. And glaucoma, as we know, is a leading cause of irreversible blindness, affecting more than 100 million people. And both of them may coexist, and the glaucomatous changes in such eyes are very difficult to detect and resulting in overdiagnosis or underdiagnosis. In various population-based epidemiological studies, they have found that definitely higher myopia is associated with greater prevalence, and myopia also has a role in the development of glaucoma at younger age. But clinic-based myopia studies have not glaucoma progression, possibly because it is very difficult to detect progression on structural or functional assessment, or maybe that the glaucoma has been misdiagnosed. As a result, there has been no progression whatsoever. Now, these are the traditional methods of diagnosing glaucoma in our patients. So let's come to one of my patients who has been under follow-up for high myopia and glaucoma for the past 11 years, of course, in different hospitals. What is important is that her father had glaucoma. Her myopia was approximately 16.50 in the right eye and left eye was 14.50. Her pressures were 17 and 16 in 2010. Her CCTs were in 544 and 541, goniostrically open angles. And as per her notes, she had possibly had some nasal defects in the right eye. And they thought maybe it is myopic. Left eye was normal. She underwent LASIK in 210. At that time, her CCT reduced to 399 and 407. And in 2014, she was put on anti-glaucoma travoprost and timolol. Now, if we look at the traditional methods, that is intraocular pressure, 3 years I've given 3 pressure readings, which we find were practically normal. But we know that intraocular pressure is higher in patients of high myopia with glaucoma. So we must do a good diurnal variation. Also, if we can take the basal pressures, we know that this is the basal pressure. And as the patient comes for follow-up, take this basal pressure and use it for comparison to know is the pressure rising or not. And in cases who have undergone, like for example, this patient keratoretractive surgery, is better to use ORA or other tonometers. Now let's have the look at the second thing, and that is the fundoscopy or the optic nerve heads, which show definite differences, can show also definite differences. So in 2014, if you look at the right eye, and again in 2019, if you look at the right eye optic nerve heads, you find that there isn't much change. So if you do serial photographs of patients also, that will also give us a good indication whether there are any changes taking place. If you look at the left eye also, we find that practically there was no change. But what happens, what are the difficulties in assessment of high myopia and glaucoma optic discs? Now, we find that in high myopia, there's a huge color contrast between the pink neuroretinal rim, which we normally see, and the pale optic disc. We find that this color contrast decreases because the neuroretinal rim pallor also increases. As a result, you can't make out the difference as to what is the neuroretinal rim and what is the optic cup. Also, the PPA, that is in cases which we see both in glaucoma as well as in cases of high myopia. In myopia, the PPA has the gamma and the delta zones, and it is very difficult to see by fundoscopy what is the beta zone of glaucoma vis-a-vis the gamma and the delta zones in cases of high myopia. Plus, there's a spatial contrast between the height of the neuroretinal rim and the bottom of the optic cup. And that occurs because there's flattening of the cup because of enlargement of and stretching of the optic disc and lamina cribrosa. So the contrast decreases. Again, we cannot make out clinically. Plus, the optic disc also may rotate. It may rotate vertically, it may rotate horizontally. But when it rotates vertically, it gives an oblique view of the optic nerve head. Then again, we always look at the retinal nerve fiber layer. But the retinal nerve fiber layer assessment becomes very difficult in the PPA region because of increased brightness of the underlying PPA tissue. Let's have a look at the left eye. Left eye, we find this looks glaucomatous because the neuroretinal rim is narrow, especially inferiorly. There is a lot of bending of the vessels near the disc margin, and the CDR is increased. We also have to remember that there can be a secondary macro disc which might appear in cases of high myopia. Now, we all know that, that the 3 layers, Bruch's membrane, choroid, and the peripapillary scleral flange that is there, they're almost in one line. But when we have high myopia, the Bruch's membrane gets pulled towards the fovea. And as a result, the Bruch's membrane sort of overhangs this peripapillary scleral flange, resulting in the gamma zone. So I've shown the pictures of how a peripapillary, gamma zone, and the delta zone occur in cases of high myopia. And this is something that focuses the clinical assessment of both these conditions. Along with that, because of this flange which occurs, because this Bruch's membrane sort of overhangs in the optic cup, and therefore our assessment of the neuroretinal thickness and osity also becomes effective. Now, then the next thing that we always assess is the visual field changes. We have to assess, are they present? Are they because of glaucoma? Are they because of high myopia? So our patient, when we go back to it, 2010, 15, and 19, a 10-2 was done in 2 years, and the last year, in 2019, a 30-2 was done. But what we find that except for the small differences that are present all around the a blind spot, no other differences have occurred. That means there has been no progression also of the patient on visual fields. But we must remember that in glaucoma, the visual fields are typically seen in the germ area as well as we can see nasal steps. Fixation only gets affected very much later because of progressive enlargement, that is towards the end stage of glaucoma. And central visual field, as I said, can be spared till the last stage. But in myopic glaucoma, early central and paracentral scotomas definitely occur because of the macular bundle occurring. Therefore, in these cases, it is always better to do a 24-2 perimetry and 10-2 perimetry, and always better to use a contact lens for these patients while doing perimetry to avoid the prismatic effects of the thick contact lenses. Now, there's another patient, 66-year-old male with high myopia of 17 and 14. And as you can see that there's a lot of where the entire optic disc is almost pale, and the peripapillary areas in both the eyes, right and left, are very big, especially in the left eye. And you can see that the CD ratio is also approximately 0.6 to 0.7. Now, if you look at his fields done in September 2019, December 2019, again in 21, if you look at the MD, PSD, and the pattern deviation probability plot, practically no difference. Similarly, in the left eye also, practically no difference, therefore telling us that the glaucoma is not progressing at all. Now, therefore, it's always better to measure the structure and the function together. This is the key in the management of myopic glaucoma. We have more parameters to assess. Now we go back to the first patient. In 2010, she underwent stratus OCT, in which we find that the peripapillary RNFL was slightly thinned out, but the macular thickening was normal. If you look at the RNFL done in 2015, 16, and 19, it's better not to look just at the colors, but better to look at the numbers. If you look at the numbers, right eye in 2015 and 16 and 19, we find that practically there's hardly any difference in the numerical value of these particular segments. Similarly, in the left eye, if you find between 2015 and 19, that there's a huge difference. I will not go into details as to why these differences can occur. That is for another segment altogether. But if we have a look at again, as the ganglion cell complexes of 15, 16, and 19, we find again differences are not very much, showing that there is no progression in glaucoma, which is very, very important for us to determine in these cases. Now, there are lots of difficulties in OCT imaging in high myopia because of poor fixation, because of development of posterior staphylomas, because of RNFL thickening, intracystic formation, abnormal retinal sloping near the disc margin. There can be RPE and photoreceptor loss. And as I've talked about, that the peripapillary atrophy also induces a misalignment of the disc as read by OCT. Therefore, another patient, let's say, we find that in high myopia, is temporal shifting of the supero and inferior the RNFL bundles, as we can see. And there can also be difficulty. We can use the GC-IPL for assessing change in glaucoma with certain limitations, of course, there. And does this patient have glaucoma? Does she need treatment? As per Robert Chang, yes, our patient had family history of glaucoma, high myopia, optic nerve is suggestive of glaucoma, LASIK both eyes before we treat. What do we do? Treat with AGM to low and the lower target, go for a lower target pressure. You can go for laser trabeculoplasty, do surgery, and trabeculectomy is very good. With one must pay attention to releasable sutures, mitomycin, and of course the risk of complications. There is something new which is coming up, normative data, including high myopia, normative data for the GC-IPL, and also the ROTA, which is underway, OCTA still has to prove. So it'll prove its value. So let us see what we can do. We must recognize the problem and diagnose the problem. Thank you very much for your kind hearing.
Dr. Madhu has not joined, so should I start sharing my slide?
Yes, ma'am. I think that would be a better option to save time because already we're running a little bit delayed.
Dr. Sagarika, can you please stop sharing yours?
Yes, she will. I'll just do that. We can see your slides, ma'am.
Yes, thank you.
You can get started.
So I'm very thankful to Dr. Patia and AIC for giving me this. So today's my topic is macular disorders and glaucoma. These are two diverse conditions and may cause blindness. They mainly affect older people and can occur concurrently. So then it becomes challenging. So there was a study, prevalence of retinal comorbidities in patients with glaucoma. The incidence was very high, 14.8%. And prevalence of certain retinal diseases was seen in 15.7. And obviously, increased risk of glaucoma is there when patients have some retinal diseases or patients with prior retinal procedures and surgeries. So there was one study, that is CARIDS, which was published in ARVO 2021. So they found an association of manifest glaucoma and macular pigment optical density. The study was conducted for almost 15 years, and hence they found that inverse association is associated with macular pigment and glaucoma. So low MP levels can be a modifiable risk factor for POG, which we don't have till now. So coming to AMD and glaucoma, they are two separate disorders affecting different parts of the eye. And if they are concurrent, definitely there would be loss of central vision as well as peripheral vision, and quality of life is worse if they are affected by both the diseases than a single disease. So coming to some real world scenarios. So this is a patient where you can see that patient has a dry AMD along with so dry AMD. The thing is that the patient has RP irregularities also and glaucoma also, which is more noticeable in the left eye. And this is the perimetry. This is so thing is that it is very difficult to monitor these patients because they have central opacities also. So performing perimetry is not good. And if you see here, they have central opacities, which is reflected in the because of the central scarring of the previous PED. So another patient, very advanced glaucoma along with wet AMD. Now this patient had a PED and which developed into wet ARMD, where you can see the formation of neovascular complex along with subretinal fluid. Left has RP bumps. So managing this patient again is very difficult because the glaucoma is progressing also, and because of the central defect, we cannot really say that whether the right eye is progressing or not. There is a paper on wet AMD and glaucoma. If there is a massive vitreous subretinal or suprachoroidal hemorrhage, then there is rapid expansion of the subretinal or suprachoroidal space, increase in the posterior segment volume. There is anterior displacement and rotation of the lens iris diaphragm, and the anterior chamber becomes shallow. There is no shallow chamber in the fellow eye, and these patients also can have ghost cell glaucoma. This is a patient of advanced POAG with central areolar choroidal dystrophy. And you can see here that the patient has left eye perimetry was not possible because of both the problems together, but right eye we could manage to do perimetry and it is showing stability, but still it is not very sure. And we need to manage these patients only on IOP and on visually how the optic disc is behaving, like Dr. Sagarika said. So this is again a patient of myopic macular degeneration with POAG. Same here story, because patient has both glaucoma as well as central defect in the visual. Now, a doctor with pseudoexfoliation glaucoma with JFT, and you can see that centrally you can see there is RP irregularity with cystic spaces, which is reflected in this scan, RNFS and RGC combined scan. And here patient has a central defect, which in the left eye can be seen only on 10-2. So very early changes can be seen in these patients if you do 10-2 also. A patient with toxoplasma, right eye has a very big scar as compared to left, and patient has also glaucoma, mainly maybe because of steroid induced. We don't know because patient doesn't give any history. And here you can see how the visual field is reflecting because of the scar of the toxoplasma. I just included this space because sometimes retinal toxoplasma, which can be parafoveal, can give rise to defects similar to glaucoma, and it is difficult to really know whether the patient has glaucoma or not. Patient had high pressures because of the steroids. A patient of existing POAG which had blunt trauma, there is development of macular scar. The NRR looks very, very thin in this patient. And this is the RNFL scan, which is showing inferotemporal RNFL defect along with a central macular defect in the visual field. A patient of open angle glaucoma, you can see the wedge shaped RNFL defects in the right eye very well, bipolar, and left eye shows almost diffuse loss. Left eye has advanced glaucoma. So this patient, if we did perimetry, you can see that patient has advanced field defects, and it is not possible to say whether this is again definitely in the right eye for because of glaucoma or a central problem. A patient with BRVO, there can be multiple presentation. This patient had right eye BRVO along with glaucoma, pre-existing primary angle closure glaucoma. You can see that there is a positional angle closure. So this patient needs PI before going because he will need dilatation, mydriatics whenever he undergoes retinal examination. So, but if you see the perimetry defect is inferiorly, which is reflecting his glaucoma in the area. So another patient of BRVO, a typical defect like a glaucoma defect, but patient had undergone laser treatment. You can see some laser scars over here. So again, a diagnostic challenges whether this is progressing or not. And on GP, you can see probably is not progressing, it's still stable. So another patient of BRVO, and patient had choroidal sclerosis, as you see here, extensive choroidal sclerosis, and he had undergone laser also for superior temporal BRVO, and you can see the fields. It is not possible to say and to follow up this patient on fields alone. The next patient, again, advanced glaucoma. Patient had a very small central tunnel vision in the right eye, but he dropped in the central vision. So we did a macula scan, and you can see the development of a cirrhosis. So sometimes some other causes can be there. Another patient, a patient of glaucoma diagnosed as normal tension glaucoma, came for second opinion, and patient actually had a macular hole which was there in the 10-2 field. So patient had tilted disc with thinning of NRR inferiorly. So again, this is a challenging case. Another patient of open angle glaucoma, patient had parafoveal ERM. She went somewhere else. She was an American citizen, so she went there and had her surgery done. So she already had existing glaucoma in the both eyes. And after that, you can see pre-op her scan and post-op scan. There is a paracentral defect which has remained. Next patient, this patient was referred for high IOP, and there was a history of a systemic steroid for vasculitis, and you can see how the developed has defect because of the vasculitis. And it is difficult to say whether this patient is progressing on serial photographs or serial OCT and visual fields. I just added one more case, a patient of tuberculoma, a central foveal, subfoveal tuberculoma is there, and you can see how the retina is behaving and how the fields are there. There is a loss of central vision in the right eye. There is association between retinal detachment and open angle glaucoma. Pre-existing glaucoma is seen in almost 7.3% of patients, and already in one eye and POAG in other eye is seen in almost 9.5% of patients in this particular study. And they have concluded that even PDS, that is pigmentary dispersion syndrome, has an increased prevalence of lattice and retinal detachments also. So coming to retinitis pigmentosa, again a very challenging situation because the field would be constricted. It is difficult to see whether the optic nerve is progressing or not on serial photographs also. And the only clue in cinepigmento patients would be disproportionate peripheral field loss, loss and minimal ONA changes. The only diagnostic clue would be doing ERG. There are other retinal diseases along with glaucoma, like Stickler's vitreoretinopathy, which is autosomal dominant disorder. Glaucoma or enlarged ONH cupping can be seen with peripapillary and macular retinoschisis, serous retinal detachments, optic nerve head pits, and colobomas also. So the message is both can coexist together, and if together, the management of both is very challenging. It is difficult to say whether the patients are progressing or stable on visual field GPA or OCT trend analysis. Both diseases may progress over time, and the most important is patients counseling is very crucial. You have to tell them that okay, or suddenly developed a central loss. You have to assure them and do give some low vision aids for these patients. Thank you for kind attention.
Thank you so much, Medha. It was absolutely phenomenal. Just
Thank
phenomenal.
you.
Thank you so much. I think we will request Professor Kirti Singh to take up her topic, which she is so well known, and I know she's going to do full justice to this topic too.
Thank you, Dr. Sagarika. Actually, I'm having a net problem, so forgive me if it stops in between. It shouldn't. I'm putting my
Don't worry, Dr. Kirti, just go ahead.
yeah. These are all the issues of digital. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Sagarika, for having me there as a co-instructor in your course. A very challenging course because you're talking about the different challenges faced by us. So my topic is neurological and psychological disorders, relevance and association with glaucoma. Now, the latest understanding about glaucoma has changed. It keeps evolving with time. And now there's so much evidence that it's a chronic neurodegenerative disorder, and it's related to the other diseases like Alzheimer's, Parkinsonism, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, and chronic inflammatory diseases like sclerosis, multiple sclerosis. And the common etiological pathway is amyloidopathies, which is common in Alzheimer's as well as glaucoma, with P38 mark pathway with the common denominator. And it's all boils down to amyloid B and tau protein changes, which in turn induce retinal ganglion cell apoptosis in glaucoma. This reduced clearance of beta amyloid is responsible also for Alzheimer's disease. So you can, and this is again more relevant for the patients of glaucoma where despite the IOP control, the disease progresses, especially in normotensive glaucoma, where we never understood the first time why this is happening. The other new thing which has come up is the cholinergic transmission in brain and eye. And because of that, citicoline has been identified as being the responsible chemical messenger for signal transduction. Therefore, the experimental studies are ongoing regarding injection drops and oral medications for inhibiting amyloid deposition, protecting the retinal ganglion cell, and stimulating the dopaminergic system. So it's being used both for amblyopia, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, and in glaucoma. However, it's experimental. So this is exciting that this neurological association is giving us some insights into glaucoma and treatment. The transneural degeneration is both anterograde and retrograde, and it involves the redox imbalance of the NOX4 and the inducible nitric oxide synthetase, and ultimately the impaired mitochondrial function. Demyelination of astrocytes has been now earmarked as the early treatment target for glaucoma. We had talked about OCT a decade ago. Now we're going to talk about the astrocyte demyelination, and the new imaging techniques are going to pick it up. Another system which is very novel has been identified, called as the glymphatic system. And this has been identified as the paravascular pathways for CSF exchange. And this dysfunctional system with reduced neurotoxin clearance, which includes beta amyloid, is the common denominator for Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and glaucoma. This again gives credence to the hypothesis where the CSF pressure is reduced in normotensive glaucoma. So this glymphatic system will explain both these aspects. Now, my other friends can argue that since both open angle glaucoma and Alzheimer's both are an aging disease, so it may be a coincidental finding that glaucoma is seen more in the Alzheimer's. However, many case control studies, and I picked up this one where you had 112 Alzheimer's patient and 116 age match controls, POG was far higher in the Alzheimer's group than the normal aging group. So, and this is the glymphatic pathway, which has been identified pretty much now as one of the mechanisms of glaucoma. So having talked about the neurological aspects of the common denominator, let's come to the psychological disturbances. Glaucoma definitely has a psychological impact, both anxiety and depression. Social isolation, functional limitation, especially visual and mobility related, economic concerns, loss of relationship, anxiety about future. Our patients go through all of these, and it's no rocket science to tell us that they would have a anxiety or depression. multiple studies have come up where they've quantified with the depression inventory scores and the sleep quality index that glaucoma not only causes depression and anxiety, but causes tono disruption or sleep disturbances. And this severity of visual field damage and glaucoma progression is increased fourfold by this depression and this tono disruption. So these are all interlinked. And as well as the social dysfunction and the limited physical activity would reduce the mental health and the social health of the patient. So whenever as glaucomatologists, we talk about the IOP and IOP alone, we have to remember, we have to talk about the patient as a whole, and we have to take care of these problems in them. Not only is glaucoma related to neurological and to psychological aspects, even glaucoma suspects, if they have anxiety, more of anxiety in glaucoma suspect has been associated with development of glaucoma. Again, very interesting study that the progression of glaucoma was faster in patients categorized as high depression vis-a-vis low depression. And the rate of RNFL thinning was calculated to be fast. So obviously there is some chemical messenger at work, which is dealing with the loss of retinal ganglion cells as well as depression in the brain. So we've understood now that there's a vicious cycle where glaucoma diagnosis and psychiatric treatment, both medical and ECT, are linked. It can progress with psychiatric disorders. It can lead to psychiatric disorders. The medications of glaucoma itself can cause anxiety and depression, and the medical treatment for psychiatry can also cause glaucoma issues. This was a very interesting study where whenever a patient is able to comprehend about the issues of glaucoma, they would not only have better adherence, they would have a better quality of life, but this imparting of knowledge would reduce the psychological disturbance and ultimately control the disease far more than just the anti-glaucoma medication. So this became an independent factor of understanding of glaucoma. That is why, again, as doctors, it's important for us to teach our patients or tell our patients about that. Other disorders associated have been bipolar disorders, major depressive and schizophrenia with glaucoma have been associated, and it has been studied that almost 18% of psychiatric disorder patients have glaucoma. It's more common in females for anxiety, people residing in urban areas, unmarried people, education less than secondary school. Again, understanding of the glaucoma disease can cause psychiatric problems. Depression was related with mostly with males. Again, these are few studies. And again, the common denominator is lack of education. So our clinical take on this is if you educate the patient about the disease, these issues will be taken care of. And the pathway has been identified as repetitive continuous anxiety, causes cholinergic transmission, and affects the intraocular pressure and blood flow. The next aspect is medication. Psychotropic drugs are anticholinergic medications, will cause pupil dilatation, and they can make the patients at risk go into pupillary block glaucoma. The names are so many. The common ones are SSRI and TCA and antidepressants. This drug merits attention because it causes an idiosyncratic reaction, ciliary body swelling and anterior rotation, and that is an unknown cause of angle closure glaucoma. ECT therapy itself, although thankfully it's very rarely performed now, does cause glaucoma by not only by the medications used during anesthesia, but by increasing cerebral blood flow and venous pressure, therefore glaucoma. Blood pressure varies, therefore the glaucoma varies, but the ocular perfusion pressure changes. So the guidelines are that within 3 weeks of any surgery, if the patient is on ECT, you have to tell the psychiatrist not to give. And wherever possible, after multiple ECTs, try a visual field, especially after the first ECT, and use non-depolarizing muscle relaxants and provide adequate oxygenation. Again, the anti-epileptic drugs, again, will cause, like topiramate, can cause secondary ACG by acute myopia and maculopathy and ciliary fusion syndrome. Zonisamide and tropicamide are notorious for this. Some drugs have a cumulative effect over long-term use, and these like GABA-energic anti-epileptic drugs will cause RNFL loss. And Botox injection, if you give for facial rejuvenation, it can cause mydriasis sometimes by transmission. by local transmission. So these topiramate is again notorious for causing bilateral ACG. So patients on this drug for epilepsy, migraine, or psychiatry have to be monitored for this. What are the clinical implications? You have to integrate psychosocial care into current treatment of patient with glaucoma. In poor adherence situations, explore the psychological aspects. Patient education to reduce anxiety and depression. And lamina cribrosa marker is a potential biomarker because thinner lamina cribrosa has been linked to impaired cognitive function. And this new drug of ceticolin is a candidate for therapeutic moieties. Meditation, we all know, it increases the brain oxygenation, serum cortisol. You could train the patients to do meditation, it would aid them. To complete the list, glaucoma masquerades. I won't cover the details of secondary glaucoma, but ischemic, compressive, and optochondrial neuropathies are well known, and primary ventricular leukodystrophy. Neuropathy, 25% is more common, and followed by compressive, which are misdiagnosed. 1/4 of this cohort of patients had misdiagnosis of glaucoma. And when they come to us, we find that almost 20% have been misdiagnosed. This is a brief list of which type of neuropathies are mimicking glaucoma. PVL, it will be in a younger patient and it will have horizontal cupping in superior optic nerve thinning. And because of secondary transsynaptic degeneration of retinal ganglion.
I'm really sorry to interrupt, ma'am, but the time has run out. If you could conclude, yes, please. Thank you so much. I'm sorry, ma'am.
When you go looking for these, when progressive disc and visual field damage happens despite IOP control, when this elevated IOP unresponsive to therapy rule out ocular tumors, and the red flags are this age younger than 50 years, poor visual acuity, neuroretinal rim pallor more than the cupping, and wherever the disc damage is not correlating with the visual field damage, pupil will give you a clue. However, this last message is that it's not worth it to keep looking for it in normotential glaucoma because this study said that only 2 or 3 patients had neurological findings. So only if you have the red flags, do the imaging test. Thank you for a very patient hearing.
Can we have our next speaker?
Sagarika, you're muted.
Yes.
Yeah, I have just said a very big thank you to you, Dr. Kirti, for making such a difficult subject easy. And you brought in such lovely stuff to for us to even think about. And the fact that neurodegenerative disorder, glaucoma stands over there. Thank you so much once again. And I will request Dr. Colonel Mrs. Bhadoria to please go ahead and bring her, speak out her presentation.
I'm right at this thing. All right.
Ma'am, you are the last person, ma'am. Just go ahead, ma'am.
Let me get the share screen on top. Yeah. So, Sagarika, can you see my screen?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
All right. So, refractive surgeries with glaucoma. It's become a really subject of importance because we are doing so many of them. So laser-assisted refractive surgeries are being done in huge numbers. Its relationship with myopia and glaucoma is a common factor. It's common with both of them. High incidence of glaucoma in presbyopic age group is another factor because even presbyopia is now being dealt with lasers. The glaucoma numbers are increasing because aging population is increasing. And if we look back, we started this surgery long back. That means around say 96, 7, 8. So the people who are 20 now are 45 and beyond now. So when we look at it a little more philosophically, every patient undergoing refractive surgery should be treated as glaucoma suspect. And therefore, glaucoma assessment is in refractive surgeries is as essential as the refractive workup. So we come straight to preoperative evaluation. If we look at it, the most important part is history of glaucoma. First degree relatives are more prone, we all know, but important it is to remember that siblings are more vulnerable than actually the parents or the children. They develop OST at a much younger age, and so they develop glaucoma. IOP is the only modifiable risk factor, but after refractive surgery, this estimation becomes very difficult because this all goes haywire because of changed corneal parameters. And in people with family history, it's not a single reading, but multiple readings and their average. DVT, if there's a very strong family history, peaks and asymmetric IOPs, all of them are equally important. So now coming to myopia. If a patient is myopic of more than 6 diopters, his chances of glaucoma are the highest amongst all the group of myopes. Then they have tilted disc, they have PPAs, which interferes with the assessment of the disc. Imaging devices, because the discs are so large, it's not compatible with the imaging devices really in a way other discs are. And pre-operative disc photos in this situation are a better tool. So stereo photographs and red-free pictures, they really are of a great value when they're done before the surgery is done on them. Now coming to another evaluation part of it, who are the higher risk? People who have a high vertical CDR, who have thinner corneas, Asians, Africans, other diseases, especially in young people, they are like pseudoexfoliation or pigmentary glaucoma. In presbyopes, hypermetropia, angle closure disease, previous glaucoma surgery, and more so if the blebs are thin and surgery has been done, then it's always a PRK or epiLASIK and not a really full LASIK. Visual fields are very important. First and foremost, mostly in most of the people, they're normal. But if there is any damage, it has to be established right before the surgery, because this is something which can become worse following the surgery. And out of all other things, if the PSD is bigger, they're more prone to glaucoma. For disc imaging here, a disc photo, a red-free one is as good as OCT. So coming to intraoperative, the IOP rises anything from say 40 to 90. And if eye already has a glaucoma damage, it is most vulnerable, but most of the people are young. So evidence has not shown so far that there is an optic nerve damage following that. There are a few studies with GDX showing RNFL thinning, but GDX itself is based on the birefringes. So birefringes are altered after the refractive surgery. So their reliability is much lesser. Visual fields in normal don't deteriorate, but can deteriorate if the glaucoma is there. So coming to now post-operative. The biggest challenge in this is IOP underestimation. And this happens because of cornea becomes thinner, there is change in corneal curvature, there is instability of corneal flap. Removal of Bowman's layer in PRK also leads to weaker cornea. Then changes of this kind are more in myopes than hyperopes. And deeper the ablation, lower is the estimation. So underestimation, I'll talk a little bit more because it's so important. So if the preoperative IOP is higher, underestimation will be lower, and so for the deep ablation. A formula for calculating, we have still not found the gold word, but Kohlhaas algorithm is supposed to be most accepted. GAT is the gold standard for the whole world, but in this situation, it becomes slightly lesser gold. It becomes more silverish. A peripheral unablated cornea may be used, and for that, a tonopen, eye care, both are reasonably independent of cornea. They are good options. DCT is really good, but it's not something that most of us have in the clinics. We don't really have them. Then changes in viscoelastic properties of cornea. In this situation, we can use a ORA, and in this ORA, IOP-CC is definitely of more value than G, and Corvus ST can also be used. But then Corvus ST is also used on Schimpeck plug camera, and those images are also altered by the refractive surgeries. Corneal permeability is another bug. Cornea becomes thinner, so it is definitely more permeable than otherwise, but it lasts only for not more than 6 months' time. And the evidence shows that timolol has efficacy of timolol was not more right after surgery as it was later. So it's not really altered for timolol at least. And prostaglandins in these patients are only as effective as timolol is. So there is really no advantage, and there's no point aggravating herpetic stuff which may be sitting behind somewhere. So drugs used are normally CAI and timolol, and could be a fixed combination or could be used alone. Steroid responders are of extreme concern. Significant IOP rise is seen in primary open-angle glaucoma, glaucoma suspects, people with family history of suffering from POAG, diabetes mellitus, high myopia, previous episodes of steroid responsiveness, rheumatic disease, and age. And these people are the people who really cause havoc. So how does it clinically manifest? In some people, it's just a simple rise, clear cornea, and you treat it all right. But in some patients, they develop pressure-induced keratitis. The cornea becomes pretty cloudy. It's a pisc. Or when it stays for a little while longer, it can convert into IFS, especially in the early phase or if there is trauma. So what happens is there, stromal swelling, which causes corneal haze. It leads to fluid accumulation between the flap and the stroma. And GAT is not really a good instrument. So if there is a steroid response, we got to stop the steroids and we take the patients on the aquasuppressants. This needs a little bit of more respect. So it occurs due to collection of fluid between flap and stroma. GAT measures IOP low due to cushion effect. Therefore, other tonometers are of more value. ASOC should be done to diagnose it because DLK and this can be confusing with each other and the treatments are opposite. If there is a DLK, in that case, we need to give steroids, but if it's a steroid response, we need to get off the steroids. So IFS responds to reduction in IOP. But there have been found cases of glaucoma progression just because of IFS. The IOP was measured low. Let's not forget something we called radial keratotomy. So this is a 46-year-old lady who came to us in 2018. She had undergone radial keratotomy in 1994. Both eyes that time had patent PI. She wanted urgent surgery, which we said is not required. So she pushed off somewhere and got one eye operated. And this is the way she came back to us. At that time, her IOP in two eyes was 130 and 32, and one eye had nuclear cataract left, other eye was done. There was a strong family history of glaucoma. Angle was open and gonio, and corneas were of 527 and 541, so they were normal corneas. Now she had a disc which was tilted, and there was some PPA, and the cupping in right eye was 0.9 and left eye 0.7 vertical large cup. Now, this patient had visual field defects, which were just commensurating with the optic disc. She underwent a phacotrabeculectomy with mitomycin C. Phaco was done temporal, and the trab was done on the superior nasal quadrant. Post-operatively, day 1, 4, 7, she had IOP first day 23, then 7 on 4th day, and on 7th day 14. Suddenly on 19th day, she came with blurring of vision, and her IOP was 40 at that time. It was immediately, the suppressant was given because the BLEV was there, BLEV was not gone, but it wouldn't respond so much. So after 6 weeks, we removed one releasable. After 8 weeks, another releasable. Then with Combigan, she stabilized at IOP of 15. Now these patients have large cylindrical errors also. So ultimately, she is stable. She is operated in both the eyes. But patients, she must have been myope. That's why RK was done. And following RK, she had another steroid response. So no matter what refractive surgery one does, but one has to remember that the steroid response is the reality. So take home is that every patient who needs refractive surgery is a potential glaucoma suspect. Pre-op evaluation like a glaucoma patient, document imaging and noticing other than glaucoma changes in the disc, like myopia, challenges in IOP measurement due to decreased thickness, biomechanical properties, viscoelastic changes, PISC and IFS. Tonometers need to be chosen carefully. Steroid responders and response need constant watch. Diagnose early, treat appropriate, and regular follow-ups. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, ma'am. And thank you to all the co-instructors. Each one has presented so beautifully and so much of information, knowledge. And I think each one of us has benefited. And I hope also the attendees will benefit. Once again, heartfelt thanks to everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Sagarika, for giving us such challenging topics. We also had to read and our understanding also increased. I never knew there was so much literature available on neurological aspects, and it was an eye-opener. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can everyone put on their videos? We'll take a screenshot.
Yep.
Ma'am will have to stop share screen. Then
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I forgot because I was the last person, so I took it for granted that we have to change the view also. Just a moment.
Yes.
Gallery view.
Ma'am, you're looking smashing with your white hair. We're only 10
Thanks.
people participants, so I can speak.
Yeah.
Just one minute. Yeah.
Meda is doing it. Meda, you'll
Yeah,
do
I'm
the
doing
honors.
it. I'm taking on this thing also, my mobile also.
No, I've taken print screen. If you want, I'll make a slide.
Yeah, I taken that also. Yeah, good, great.
But believe you me, this
Thank
is
you
a
all.
real fantastic topic, and you have done such a fabulous job. I mean, like, I would love to go through all the presentations once again. It's so beautiful. Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much.
Sagarika.
Do it
Thank you
again,
so much.
Sagarika, at DOS level so that we have a longer time, because it is the topics which you have chosen require a more elaborate covering up rather than 7 to 8 minutes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
10 minutes. Anyway, thank you all so
Ah,
much. Thank you. God bless you all. Thank you.
Thanks,
you.
Sagarika. All the best. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Mr. Nikhil, the guest speaker, Mr. Nikhil.
Yes, I'm here. Sorry, I was just
Yeah,
trying to switch on the camera
no
because
problem.
we were taking
No
a
problem.
screenshot.
It's okay. Will the guest speaker be coming in?
Just a second. We have to confirm with Dr. Priyam. Dr. Priyam, if you could let us know if the guest speaker is here.
I have video.
Acha, you have a video?
Yes.
So let's have the video.
So can I introduce the topic, the speaker, please?
Yes, ma'am.
So we have with us as our keynote speaker, Dr. Shams Mohammad Numan. And he's an associate professor in glaucoma at the Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Medical College, Dhaka. He is the publications secretary of the OSP and member secretary, Bangladesh Ophthalmic Research Forum, and secretary, OSP, Chittagong. He has won many awards, chief of which are the Mubaraka Kalia Award, Best Paper in Glaucoma, Professor Haroon Award Academy, and Professor Mateen Gold Medal, Best Paper in OSP, and the SARC Achievement Award in Kathmandu, Nepal. We welcome you. Please, Dr. Shams Mohammad Numan, we welcome you to this particular session, and we would love to hear what you have to say.
Honorable panelists of this session, honorable audience, good evening to everybody. My topic is management of pseudoexfoliation glaucoma. I don't have any financial interest. I'm Dr. Shams Mohammad Numan, Associate Professor, Department of Glaucoma, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujib Medical University, Bangladesh. I want to start with a case. This is a case of male, 51 years. He had a vision 660, pinhole 612. He has a 35 millimeter of mercury with all medications. In picture, we can see some pseudoexfoliation materials over the lens. This is the disc finding, advanced cupping with bipolar notch. I did the trabeculectomy with cataract surgery. In this case, I gave the triangular flap. After doing the CCC, I just removed the lens with the tumbling method. I had to take care of the geniole while removing the lens. After doing the peripheral iridectomy, I just gave 1 sutures in the apex of the triangular flap. This is the postoperative picture, the 612 vision and 12 millimeter of mercury intraocular pressure. So pseudoexfoliation syndrome is an age-related systemic condition that is characterized by an abnormal accumulation of deposition of extracellular matrix materials throughout the anterior segment of the eye, most notably along the pupillary border and on the lens capsule. This is one of the most common identifiable secondary open-angle glaucoma, and it's common in the Scandinavian countries. LOX1 gene is responsible. The pathogenesis is the pseudoexfoliation materials entrapped within the trabecular meshwork pore that causes resistance to outflow. The prognosis is really very worse because it has a high tendencies of intraocular pressure, and the progression is more, and progression of visual field and also optic nerve cupping is more comparison to the primary open-angle glaucoma. We can start with the medical management in early case. For this, as the progression is very much rapid, so immediate and appropriate treatment is very much important after diagnosis. Prostaglandin analog has a role, but in some studies shows that it causes relatively some inflammation. Beta blocker has a good role in case of middle income people. Carbonic anhydrase inhibitor has a great role, and also where the one medication doesn't work, in that case combination medications works good. Surgical options have many, like laser trabeculoplasty, filtration surgery, and tube shunt implantation. We can use the selective laser trabeculoplasty and argon laser trabeculoplasty, but selective laser trabeculoplasty is better. And average the 6 to 7 millimeter of mercury intraocular pressure can be reduced after trabeculoplasty. But in the cataract with high pressure, trabeculoplasty doesn't have any good result. This is a case of advanced pseudoexfoliation glaucoma with mature cataract with a little subluxation. In that cases, I didn't do the phaco surgery. I did the manual small incision cataract surgery, as the anterior chamber is very much shallow. After doing a very good CCC, I had to remove the nucleus in a very cautious way, as the nucleus is very much hard, and I had to take care of the geniole. And the geniole was very much weak, almost 100 degree. In that cases, I put CTR ring. After putting the CTR ring, I stabilized the lens bag, and then I put the intraocular lens. So postoperatively, the patient was doing good. This is another case where there is a early pseudoexfoliation glaucoma, but advanced visual field defect. In that cases, I did combined surgery, phacotrabeculectomy. In that cases, I had to take care of the geniole, I had to take care of the endothelium. Same method, I did the single suture trabeculectomy, triangular flap, and the postoperatively patient was doing really very great with controlled intraocular pressure. Trabeculectomy. Glaucoma surgery is generally undertaken when glaucomatous progression occurs or intraocular pressure is elevated to a level that progression is likely despite maximum medical therapy. A 20 years follow-up study shows that pseudoexfoliation glaucoma cases that failure rate of trabeculectomy is more in comparison to the primary open-angle glaucoma. And pseudoexfoliation, those patients have a pseudoexfoliation, they have a tendency to develop more cataract. So in that cases, combined cataract and glaucoma surgery is needed. If we do the cataract surgery alone, we can do where the glaucometer changes are minimum. In that cases, average intraocular pressure reduction is 2 millimeter of mercury. But combined versus cataract surgery alone, if we do the only cataract surgery, in that case, only 1 to 2 millimeter of intraocular pressure reduction occurs. But if we do the combined surgery, in that case, 4 to 6 millimeter of mercury, intraocular pressure is reduced. So the combined cataract and trabeculectomy surgery has a greater role in case of pseudoexfoliation glaucoma with cataract. But we can do the combined, but in a separate time. In that case, failure of trabeculectomy is more. We can do the express implant. Different studies suggested that the express implant also does a good. The advantage is it may reduce inflammation due to decreased tissue manipulation. But average, no difference between the express implant and trabeculectomy. Trap versus tube implant. In the trap versus tube study, for the 5 years study was done, intraocular pressure reduction is almost similar in the tube, especially in the Barwelt implant compared to the trap only. But failure rate is significantly higher in the trap group. We can do the angle-based procedure like trabectome surgery and also viscocanalostomy. And a postoperative consideration. Usually in case of pseudoexfoliation glaucoma, there is some aqueous flare and fibrinoid reaction and posterior synechia can be occurred. In that cases, the pseudoexfoliation patient, we have to give aggressive steroid to reduce the inflammation. Early postoperative IOP spike is more in case of pseudoexfoliation glaucoma. In that case, we have to take care of intraocular pressure too. And very interesting, intraocular pressure elevation more than 30 millimeter of mercury. This is more common in the phacoemulsification alone, rather combined surgery, where the 8.3% have a intraocular pressure more than 30 millimeter of mercury. We have a lot of challenges like rigid pupil, hard nucleus, zonular weakness, high intraocular pressure, advanced optic nerve damage, postoperative IOP spec, and postoperative inflammation. So what is my take-home message is, pseudoexfoliation glaucoma with no cataract with high pressure, we can start with the medical treatment, then laser, then trabeculectomy. If the medical treatment and laser failed, pseudoexfoliation glaucoma with cataract with high pressure, we have to control the intraocular pressure even with hyperosmotic agent, then we can do the combined surgery. But most important thing is take care of the increased incidence of postoperative complications like inflammation and also trabeculectomy failure later on. Thank you so much. Thank you for the patient hearing.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Nikhil? Mr. Nikhil? Mr. Nikhil?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much. I think the session has ended and well in time. And thank you for your cooperation. I once again thank everyone as well as the keynote speaker. And once again, I think we can now break off from the session.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.